Hi, Ian. Welcome to our podcast, and thank you for joining us as one of our guests. I was excited that Silent Pool wanted to be a guest on this podcast because you've got a lot to bring to the table. A lot of exciting new brands being released, and from my perspective, not just as a drinker of Silent Pool gin, but certainly as an appreciator of the different expressions you release. It's certainly great to get you pinned down, Ian, and understanding a bit about what the thinking was behind Silent Pool and its next steps. So my first question for you is, who is Ian McCulloch to Silent Pool?
Oldest serving member of the team, fixer of printers, door hinges, cash flow. Yeah, so my job's to sort of run it, but we are a very small outfit, so it does mean that sometimes you're fixing printers and other times you're doing bottle designs.
Yes, and I think as the managing director, that's a really interesting dynamic for a brand that externally feels enormous. It feels everywhere. It feels like a multinational affair, really. To know that actually it's being run by quite a small team, and that requires the skills across different roles to get stuck into different things, is really interesting. So I would really love, before we get into anything, I would really love to find out a bit more about Silent Pool as the brand name. Where did it come from? What is silent about it?
So it came. My previous career was in TV. I was responsible for the money in at ITV, and one of the things. So I came out of there quite a while ago now, nearly 20 years ago. One of the things that generates the highest revenue in ITV is drama, and the reason for that is it engages you on a sort of heart level. It's not particularly rational. There's no set functional benefits, but it's emotionally driven. And I came out of ITV and wanted to start a business that relied on brand, that it was the brand that drove sales, brand drove margin. I'm not an inventor. Rather than invent something that was functionally very good, this was a product that relies on storytelling around the attributes that it's got. And the bit that I wanted to focus in on was craft. Lots of people talk about craft, and it can often be a shorthand for a bit crap. So somebody says, I make my own jam. You think, oh, great, okay. Or my own wine, my own beer. And you think, yeah, great, okay. And it never tastes, well, sometimes it does taste good, but by and large, it's not that good. Somebody says, I make my own furniture, and you look at it and it's all slightly on the wonk, and it's just, what I wanted to do was see if we could focus down on the bit of English culture, which is English high-end craft. So handmade furniture like David Lindley furniture, or a handmade saddle, or a handmade pair of lob shoes, or a handmade pair of Purdy's. So England makes all sorts of handmade things that aren't stamped out of sheets 1,000 at a time. And they're often things that you look at and just think, wow, how does somebody make that? I mean, old cars, old Bentleys, old racing cars. We used to make lots of things. We still make some things, but that's what I wanted to try and capture, was English craft. And we do it with Savile Row, handmade suits. And there's nowhere else in the world that makes suits like Savile Row suits. And yet you look at them and they're just stunning. They're just amazing. So that was where I focused on. Was lucky that I live about 5 miles from the Silent Pool. I was originally looking for a log cabin in the woods. sort of Discovery Channel where we'd all grow square ginger beards and sit in the woods distilling booze. But bumped into the Silent Pool, got chatting with the guy who runs the estate for the Duke, and that was it. We did a deal on the property, asked whether we could use the name. The Duke of Northumberland owns the Silent Pool. He said, yeah, fine. Any issues around abstraction rights, taking water from no, fine. And we looked at all sorts of names around Surrey Hills, but kept getting drawn back to the Silent Pool because it sounds moody and atmospheric and
almost mythical.
Mysterious. Yeah. Well, it is sort of mythical. It's been there for 10,000 years. Druids used to drown witches there. So if you were accused of, this is quite a long time ago, if you were accused of being a witch, you got thrown in. If you sunk, you weren't a witch. If you floated, you were a witch. And then they burnt you.
So win-win situation.
Not a good day out. There's all sorts of mystical stories around it. It has a myth. It's a very beautiful spring-fed pool in the Surrey Hills. So, yeah, it's got a lot of sort of romance and atmosphere around it.
Yeah. And, of course, you mentioned a couple of things there, but going back to your original, we were saying about this sort of artisan, local high-end talent, if you will, but bringing that essence of craft. I mean, there's more and more of a demand for that as we've now commoditized, outsourced, become more increasingly globalized as a commercial entity and business. You're seeing more of a drawback to, well, let's appreciate the arts and the artists of the UK, and it's really interesting to see that line of inquiry is where Silent Pool really started its thinking. It also answers my question of which came first, the Silent Pool or the distillery. And
by about 9,998 years, the Silent Pool came first.
But I mean, that goes into, I came across, one of your core values at Silent Pool is listed as that handmade quality. That's really important to you. And that's really important to throw into, to underpin the brand. But there are other things that you highlighted just now that kind of draws back to Silent Pool of really embracing the provenance of Surrey Hills and really embracing what that nature and that environment brings. Does that actually come into the creation of the gin itself at all? Surroundings?
A bit. I mean, it's, as I said, I live here. It's an AONB, so an area of outstanding natural beauty, although I think they've changed the designation now. So it's one down from a national park. We're 27 miles from Oxford Circus, although it doesn't feel that way. We're midway between Gatwick and Heathrow. It doesn't feel... I mean, you're out in the countryside, and if you know where to go, you can find some stunning spots. There's lots of ancient woodland, so that's woodland that's never been cultivated, that's thousands of years old. What we wanted to do, the original sort of brief was, could we paint a flavour palette, or a palette using flavours that capture the Surrey Hills? So there are things in there. There's honey in there. There's lavender, which it comes from a organic lavender farm in Epsom. There's linden in there. There are things that are local to here, which was the sort of inspiration. The problem is everyone starts with that nonsense on their website of, we'll get up before dawn as the mist settles upon the berries and we'll forage for botanicals, which is great until Waitrose ring up and ask you for 11 pallets. And then you can't do it that way. So it was inspired by the Surrey Hills. We source as much as we can locally. We source as much as we can from the UK. As I said, lavender comes from Epsom. Kaffir lime comes from Essex. Orris comes from West Sussex, I think. but some stuff has to be coming from overseas. There are juniper berries or juniper bushes at the top of the hill, but they've got no oil in them. The weather's wrong here, so we do bring those in from Macedonia and Bosnia. So that's where the best juniper berries come from.
Oh, interesting. And our climate's just not attuned to it.
No, you need hard winters and hot summers, and we end up with slightly mushy sort of winters and slightly mushy summers. And it's
we'll see what global
no
warming
good for the oil content. Sorry?
We'll see what global warming brings us in terms of extreme weathers, which is actually a nice segue. But before we do, I wanted to chat about sustainability. Now, of course, I've just mentioned global warming. Sustainability seems like an extremely important factor for Silent Pool's brand. Would you say that is the case, or?
Yeah, it is. Job one isn't sustainability. Job one is to pay the staff, to pay suppliers, to do it in a sustainable way. So we try and act as good global citizens. We are not sustainable ninjas. We haven't got the margins to just go crazy on it. But we do what any citizen, we sort. It's like sorting the rubbish out. You do all that stuff. You turn lights off. You try and reuse stuff. We spend a lot of money. Well, we do spend a lot of money on it, but there comes a limit to what you can do practically. So we stripped out all the plastic and stuff from mail order. We use local hardwood to fire the still. But we can't get into audits going too far upstream because they just get very expensive, and it's not an overhead we can bear currently. But we reuse a lot. I mean, one of the areas of sustainability, people talk about sort of recurring sustainability where, do you use firewood? Do you use vegetable oil that's been reused? But there are also things you can buy that you don't need to buy. So things like stainless steel tables, you can't wear a stainless steel table out. So we get them off eBay used, 2 hours with a Brillo pad, they look like new.
Yeah.
Now that's saved making, I don't know what the carbon footprint of a stainless steel table is, but it's that sort of thing. We'll reuse stuff. We're quite careful with what we do. We repair, reuse, bring stuff back to life. The boiler that we use for the small still is a 70-year-old boiler. It hasn't got any microchips on it, but it works perfectly so long as you rub along with the way it works. You can't rush it. You've got to do things gently, but once you get it up and running, it's fine.
And I think there's an important message there to say that, as the drive for sustainability that's coming from, all avenues, it's coming from, up above, regulation, they're starting to tighten things up, and that's, affecting packaging and the packaging industry. But of course, larger businesses seem to have more responsibility in this area. And so to be able to balance it as a small business, to make responsible choices, make responsible decisions, you're still making active contributions to the sustainability initiatives without actually people fully realizing it. You can make decisions to reuse, recycle, etc. So that's really interesting. So you mentioned at the very beginning that you wanted to create a brand that really drives the success, and you created Silent Pool. You've created a distillery that's right next to the Silent Pool in the Surrey Hills, and you put a lot of onus on storytelling. How did you use storytelling to really carve out a position for Silent Pool? Because you've done it very successfully.
We spend a lot of time and put quite a bit of effort into the tone of voice that we use. So we try to talk to people as if they're adults. Not every communication is bye, 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 bye. So when people engage with the distillery or email lists or whatever comes out, anything they see, it's almost peer-to-peer. So
Yeah.
it isn't talking down to people. It's not patronizing them. When people come to the site, one of the things we wanted to do with the site was not create a Disney version of a distillery. And you see it in some of the Scottish distilleries where you go in there, there's a mash tun, can't work out when it was last used. They say to you, look, there's a still over there. And you look at it and think, well, is it on? I can't, there's nobody about, there's nothing on the floor, there's no mess, there's no hoses, nothing.
Yeah.
If you come here, you can walk around the entire site in 90 seconds. There are hoses, steam, botanicals, alcohol, bottles, stoppers, stuff going on. Nothing leaves here unless it's in a bottle. So there is a degree of honesty. We say to people, nothing gets tankered off. So it's under our eyes from end to end. We don't let other people fiddle with it. And if you want to come and see it, that's fine. So it's not quite open door because of health and safety, but there's nothing weird. We don't use weird chemicals. But if you want to check that out, you can. So when people see or read the websites and start to scratch the surface and the story beneath, what we've tried to do is make sure it's consistent, that you won't catch us out. You won't suddenly go, oh, yeah, well, actually, we put a load of weird chemicals in there and we irradiate it and we do all sorts of stuff to it. We don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a
the authenticity behind it.
straightforward process that you can come and witness. The communication is sort of peer-to-peer. And we recognise that gin is not the number one subject in most people's lives.
Isn't it? No?
Actually, no, probably for all sorts of good reasons. It's a fun thing. We don't go banging on about botanicals and botanicals arms race. We talk about why it's fun, why it gives you, it's about friends. It's about enjoying the right atmosphere. In many ways, with Silent Pool Gin, it's about making a statement that you've curated your way through a world of gins and arrived at Silent Pool. So by the time you're sampling Silent Pool, we've already filtered through that you've got a bit more about you. You're a bit more inquisitive. You want to find out more. You don't necessarily want to become a Jedi Knight of gin. It's more Reader's Digest. You want to skim around, see what your mates say, like the taste, that's interesting, and you slowly walk your way out into the landscape. But a lot of people don't. They'll stop at ghastly purple gins at £22 a bottle that aren't made with good ingredients. That's where they'll stop.
So you definitely have a clear picture of your customer and the type of drinker that Silent Pool is relevant for. And you have created something distinctive. As someone who came across your gin in the earlier years, I felt like you created something quite distinctive on the shelf. Can we talk a bit about that when you your approach in creating that first bottle? And it's quite a daunting experience to where do you even start with the design of a new brand? And what things do you consider?
So on the liquid front, segmented the market up into with just 4 segments. One segment had sort of cheap, historic gins that we all sort of know, like Gordon's, let's suppose. Then there was a box with gins that have got an overbearing flavour, so that they're flavour dominant. Didn't want to go in that box. Then there's a box with weird stuff, all that stuff with sugar in it, purple stuff, lots of rhubarb. There was one in the papers or in the trade rags this week. Whitley Neal are making a bacon and horseradish gin that doesn't have any bacon in it.
Okay.
So I
Links back to that
somebody needs to write to that.
authenticity.
It's a good, yeah. So that's a good idea. We'll make it weird, fine, but actually we won't put any weird stuff in it. We're going to put, I guess, chemicals in it. I don't know. Anyway,
Mhm.
there was another box that had interesting gins in it from my point of view. Brands like Gin Mare, The Botanist, Monkey 47,
Yeah.
and that's where it felt there was a more interesting space. And that's where we started. So we didn't want something flavor dominant. We wanted to create something that was layered, interesting, that you couldn't necessarily put in a pigeonhole.
Yeah.
And that's where the liquid started. On the bottle, engaged a very good design company called Seymour Powell in London.
Yeah. You know them.
I had started, the thing I had in my head was Edwardian blue glass and pewter perfume bottles. You see them in antique shops where they've got that sort of filigree pewter wrap, and that always it looked impossible to make because you stand there looking at these things thinking, well, how have they got a bottle inside a metal cage? But it was very fine and delicate, and they look good. So we worked with Seymour Powell, and we talked to them about the craft bit, about something that was classy and sort of resonated with craft. So the original idea was to do a copper sheets of laser cut copper wrap, but when you start trying to bend them around a bottle, they turn into 50p piece, or in the olden days not sixpences, threepenny bits, and you can't bend them around a bottle. And again, when Waitrose ring up and ask for 11 pallets, you'd be spending forever trying to put the thing on them. We wanted to have a bottle that was recognizable either way round. So if somebody had it the wrong way round on a shelf, people would clock what it was. And Seymour Powell came, it was in a presentation, it was one of 5 ideas. And as soon as they put it up there, right, bang, that one, that's it.
But you know.
So the teal colour is derived from the water in the pool. The water in the pool comes up through a phosphate layer. And when you've got low angle light, so sort of early morning, a still summer's early morning, you'll get a teal look to the water, and that's what the base color is. The copper reflects the copper still that we use, and the pattern is the botanicals that we use. So that's the sort of, if you look at it, you'll see rose in there, coriander, chamomile, juniper. That's the pattern.
Indeed, yeah. So you're also subtly communicating the authenticity, the composition of the gin, but creating this aesthetic. And I think there's something to take away from that. It's important to have your vision and to own that going into working with creative agencies. Because I mean, creativity. In fact, I think that's another value that you you communicate is this rule breaking creative spirit that Silent Pool have, and that can take in so many different directions. But you had a clear vision of what
We
that
didn't
might
want
look
this
like.
to be a we didn't want this to be a factory. So at its core, it's a home for creative distillers. We make all sorts of products. Silent Pool Gin is by far and away the biggest,
Yeah,
but the guys produce all sorts of short run spirits. We distill local wine. We do all sorts of things. So we want people to think of it as a creative place rather than it's a factory where we
yeah,
walk in the morning, hit the button, and
yeah.
bubbles come out the other end.
And I certainly think it comes through that way. And you've mentioned it earlier about the different expressions you've explored, and looking at some of them. There's kaffir lime, you've got the citrus gin, you've got the rose expression. And I got the impression that it was very much led by the retailers. And of course, you are available in physical retailers like Waitrose, but you are also available online. So is it very much led by retailers? We want you to release another expression, or is there also an impetus within the team to go, actually, we've sussed that this might really work for us, and this could work in business?
It's a combination of both. By and large, we're market led.
Yeah.
So we did a travel retail exclusive last year with English Garden Expression. That was only available in Gatwick and Heathrow, and that was driven by the GTR guys asking for an exclusive.
Yeah.
We're doing another one this year with it's not just UK but worldwide exclusive, but only in travel retail. But we'll come up with things, so we'll invent stuff, and if we think it's got legs on it, we'll go with it. So we say to people that we've never looked at a new idea through a spreadsheet. That's not the original job. One isn't margin hurdles. Will it make money? It's, does it fit? Can we add value? Is it appropriate? Does it work? Is it different? We will then obviously not want to lose money. We'll reverse engineer what the numbers need to be.
Yeah.
But it starts with creative distillers, flavors, something interesting.
Yeah. And you can see that you've developed this, full range of portfolio of these different expressions, and not even different flavor palettes, but widening the flavor palette, but different price points as well. I think recently you've released the Black Juniper, which is a completely different position in market for a gin, and I think it was a bit of a game changer in the market for gins, being at a higher retail point. Can you tell me how much of the packaging played a part in creating that differentiation, or how much did the flavors also play a part in creating something that was worthy, which it is, of a different more luxury position?
So that was, well, it still is aimed at travel retail. We obviously sell it outside of travel retail. Retail price is £295. And what we were looking to do was to see whether we could make the equivalent of a single malt.
Yeah.
So people don't bat they bat a bit of an eyelid, I suppose, but single malts might go from 50, 60, 70 pounds up to thousands. And that's accepted in the price. That's just what they cost. I mean, you're buying time normally in that they've had to sit in a barrel for a number of years. But we wanted to see whether we could produce a sipping gin that wasn't gimmicky. It didn't have weird stuff in it. It was authentic. And that's what we did. So the juniper comes from the Himalayas. It comes from Bhutan. We have a connection with the honorary consul, the British honorary consul in Bhutan, and his son, who runs the yak herding ladies, who are the pickers in the off season.
Wow.
So yeah, we know exactly where it's come from. They go up there. It's only harvested above 12,000 feet. We also use oud to smoke some of the juniper over oud. And it's got rare teas in it. It's got a lot of the house style is layered, complex, interesting, and this is a more intense version of that, using botanicals from Asia, but not sort of traditional Chinese flavors where you just think, oh, it's got all that Chinese stuff in it. It's absolutely not that, but it focuses on an area around the Himalayas and a few areas east of that.
Yeah. And how did, you've put all this effort into creating such a unique taste profile, and one that isn't mass produced, doesn't have chemicals, one that is very authentic and fits the bill with Silent Pool. How does the packaging, how does the bottle aesthetic play a part in distinguishing that gin? for the retail
We
market.
looked at what the whiskey guys did, and you sort of got to raise your game because they put more effort into what it looks like. To be honest, the best thing to do is to engage a world-class design outfit, give them a bit of a brief, and let them get on with it.
Yeah.
And that's so we work with Seymour Powell around the themes of what it was, it's not actually the competitor set, but where it might sit in a travel retail environment. So it wouldn't necessarily, Black Juniper wouldn't probably sit on an aisle stand. It's more likely to be a wall bay. It's more likely to sit next to Dalmore or Dalwhinnie or Macallan. So you've got to put a bit more effort into it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the important bit, is how do you stand out? How do you make your particular bottle distinctive with the likes of Dalmore's and those higher end malt whiskies that you're competing against? And is it just physical? Like, is it color? Is it, what to you?
It's colour and feel. I mean, we wanted, if you go back to the car analogy, a lot of old cars have switches and things that you sort of switch a switch. It's not a clicky modern button, but there's a sort of clunk to it. A bit like if you go to a stately home and flick a light switch, there's a sort of satisfying clunk as if something's moving underneath. So that tactile nature with that bottle, where you've got physical weight and you've got things that are made of metal rather than plastic, they're not bendy, they feel substantial, and they feel finely made,
Yes,
is important.
I agree. And even the weight, if you start thinking factors like looks, tactility, and the weight of bottles can also give that extra luxury feel. And I think whiskies do that with their sort of heavyweight glass and their metal embellishment.
Weight is normally a proxy for quality. People associate the two.
Do you think that's still true?
Yeah. I mean, if you go back to cars, if you shut the door on a Bentley, you get a satisfying sort of thump, or a BMW. You do it on a less expensive sort of city car, they sound clangy and thin. But that's what you sort of want. You don't want a big, heavy door. Right. You want something that's light and easy to maneuver. But the sense when you close doors on Range Rovers or Bentleys or those sort of cars is it feels solid, substantial, thought through, enduring, expensive.
Yeah. I like it. I completely agree. And tapping into that sort of sensory element of marketing and building that brand all comes into play. That you always said that from the beginning, you wanted Silent Pool's brand to really drive this home, and that attention to detail with those different senses and that experience you're giving your customer, that goes a long way into delivering that brand experience. There are a couple of questions I wanted to explore and to finish this particular area and aspect of the topic. And you mentioned travel retail. You mentioned that physical retailer with what you being in Waitrose shelves, which is fantastic. But there's also the online retail space. And do you think that it requires a different strategy to make sure you stand out? Because there's a lot of sort of aggregate retailers that you'd be available on. Is it a different strategy? You can't touch, you can't feel.
It's a tough environment for brand driven products because they tend to differentiate on price. So you do what you can, but it's, from my point of view, it's not the best customer experience. It's normally somebody who's already bought us, has got the story, and it's price driven. I struggle with online retailing as a place to build a brand. I understand online communication is somewhere where you can augment the building of a brand. But there's nothing quite like walking into a shop and holding something and opening it and feeling it and looking at it. All the nuances you get by just being close up to something, as opposed to online where you've got a picture of something and that's it.
So
So
the
we don't have
physicality.
a different strategy beyond trying to avoid just trashing the brand, which is what some people will do.
Totally. And it really does highlight how important being in the physical space and being present there is so important for creating a successful brand. Because you're right, if you start ending down an online only strategy, you end up in this Me Too price war with other competitors before they even begin to appreciate you. Did you start with going out to trade fairs and
We I started selling it out at the back of the car locally. We then
that
did a
obviously went
couple of
well?
did a couple of farmers markets. We now do about 500 external events a year. We sample just shy of 100,000 people a year.
Well,
So it's about liquid on lips, getting them to taste it, getting them to touch it, see it. That makes a difference. I don't think we'd have been where we are now if we focused just online.
yeah, I can see that. Definitely see that. I mean, going back to those initial days selling at the back of the truck and the success that's over the years has created, you've now been acquired by a very prominent, very large international drinks group, William Grant. How does that, or does that, pave a different avenue for Silent Pool moving forward?
Well, hopefully it'll expand. They're a great brand home for us. They are a family-owned business that understands brand building. Obviously, the numbers need to stack up, but they know what it takes to build a brand, and that it isn't a straight every route between 2 points isn't necessarily a straight line. That there are different ways of doing it. It is about tone of voice. It's about how you communicate with people. They have huge resources, particularly on sales. So hopefully, by us, in effect, outsourcing our sales to the William Grant sales operation, it means we've got more boots on the ground in more countries, more expertise. They have deep knowledge of markets. They obviously operate in markets with whiskies, high-end whiskies, very high-end whiskies, and that gives us access to customers and channels that we could get there, but it would probably take us 50, 60 years to do it. So this is a perfect fit in that they have an upscale portfolio and we fit well in there. We're not an outlier. We're not an obvious fit for them.
Yeah, 100%. So it sounds like Silent Pool got to a point where its success has now led to scalability. And I like what you said there in terms of we could get there on our own, but it would take longer. And that scalability there'd be an opportunity cost of that by not having and taking advantage of the networks, the insights, the experience, and certainly the distribution and sales that a large group like William Grant can offer. So it's a really exciting time, I can imagine. Probably quite busy.
Yes, very busy. Off to the US tomorrow, so we're training the New York sales team, and then we've got a training program that rolls out. It's every other week across the US. We've been in the US for a long time, but this gives us a massive boost. Travel retail will more than double this year, simply because we've got more access to more markets, conversations taking place at different levels, more innovation, more expertise. So, yeah, there are it will accelerate our growth. So that's
Yeah,
what we're focusing on at the minute.
absolutely. A slight digression, but just before we tie things to an end, I wanted to chat a bit about Green Man Spirits, the world's first paperboard bottle, and it offers customers a real experience when it comes to selecting how they use the bottle, paying it forward, picking what tree they would like to select, where it needs to be donated. Uh, Is that under the Silent Pool umbrella, or
It's
is
under
this a new
Silent Pool
venture?
Distillers. So
Yeah,
the business is called Silent Pool Distillers.
yeah,
Sitting under the business are different brands. Silent Pool Gin is a brand. Green Man is there. There is a line called Silent Pool Distillers. There's a whiskey line called Woodcutter's Daughter. We make a vodka called Rye Vodka,
that's right. Yeah,
with a W. The logic was, or the nearest analogy was Volkswagen Group. So if you look at Volkswagen, they obviously make Volkswagen cars. They also make Seat, Skoda, Bentley, Lamborghini, Porsche, Audi. So you could disconnect if somebody came along. The theory was if somebody came along and said, "Oh, we like that brand, but don't really want to buy the business," you could disconnect brands that you have built without having to sell the entire business. So we
uh-huh.
do have different brands sitting under the distillers line. In part, it gives us the ability to innovate in different directions. So
Yeah, absolutely.
there isn't just a sense of we just turn up and make one product and that's it. Um, the distillers will make all sorts of things. Green Man came up by a sort of happy accident. The guys that invented the bottle rang us up and said, we never put a spirit in it. Do you want to be the first one? So we sort of thought that's a good idea because it feels sustainable. Surrey's the most wooded county in England. Um, they use a cardboard bottle. I started looking at the Green Man, who's the pagan god of the forest. We spent a lot of time trying to do a contemporary version of him. If you Google him, you end up with a slightly gothic fella with oak leaves for eyebrows and conkers for eyes and turnips for ears. So we've done a modern version of him. We've supported forest bathing. There's a lot of forestry here, and it's the theory is there's what people are now realizing is particularly with ancient woodland there is more to it than a clump of trees.
Really.
That you do get a sense of okay, there's stuff going on beneath the surface. The trees don't necessarily communicate with each other, but there is evidence that if you've got a stand of trees and one is poorly, the others will divert nutrients to the one that's poorly. Oaks will often shed leaves at the same time. They'll coordinate when they drop leaves. Um, there's more interconnectedness between us. I sound like a sort of old hippie, but between us and the environment that we've now walked away from. Whether
Yeah,
it's a sea or it's walking up mountains or woodland, we go back not that far, 200,000 years, but there's a lot of what's wired into us that relates to that sort of environment. That's why we feel comfortable looking at green fields. We look at concrete and think, yeah, it doesn't really look very good. It's sort of functional. But that moment where you look at a green field or you look at a beach, and it's a
mhm.
completely natural environment that makes you feel different. So with woodland, Green Man was a natural fit, completely different flavor profile. So yeah, that's what we did.
So to bring this to a close and to round up Silent Pool as a brand, we talked a lot about car analogies, and that just reminds me of if you were to come up with the one thing that Volvo, for instance, reminds you of, and it's age old. People are like, right, safety. I don't know if that's still relevant, but back in the day, it was that's the safest car brand. If we did the same exercise with Silent Pool, what would your word be?
So the example we often use is we wanted to take an English classic and make a contemporary iteration of it. So the example that we've used is Aston Martin. If you look at an Aston Martin DB5 or 6, that's a Gentleman's Express from the 60s. If you take an Aston Martin DB12, so a modern one, that's Gentleman's Express from wherever we are, 2024. If you put the two cars together and say to people who aren't necessarily into cars, can you see the link between those two across 50 years, 60 years? And most people will look at them and go, yeah, got it. They look sort of lithe, powerful. They look as though they do something, and they do. They're there for sort of crossing continents, driving from here to Milan or wherever you want to do. But one is a modern version, a contemporary version of the other.
And that's what Silent Pool is.
That's
it's more than one word, Ian, but
yeah, I know. But it's also beautiful. It's got leather. It's got all sorts of dials. It moves you. It moves the spirit.
Well, Ian, I thank you so much for your time. I know it's a busy period for you, and so taking 40 minutes out to talk to us and these listeners, I think is very generous of you, and I think we'll take a lot from it. So thank you for sharing some of that journey.
My pleasure.
And we look forward to seeing how you carry on moving forward.
Yeah, well, come down and visit us. You know where we are.